Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Demystifying Dysphagia, Strategies, Recipes, and Tips for Implementing IDDSI Guidelines. This webinar is sponsored by General Mills Convenience and Food Service, providing the food people love away from home. They are proud to offer the quality products that food service professionals rely on for consistent results in their own operations, as well as the beloved brands their consumers know and trust. General Mills Convenience and Food Service is proud to be a supporter of IDDSI as a gold level sponsor. Also supporting today's webinar is General Mills Bell Institute of Health and Nutrition. If you're not familiar with the Bell Institute, they are a dedicated group within General Mills whose mission is to be the source of scientific health and nutrition expertise that creates value and growth for General Mills. My name is Deborah Swiefelhofer. I'm the owner of Nutrition Affairs, which provides consultation to the food and health industries, and I will be your host for the webinar today. Before we begin today's program, though, I'd like to cover just a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. The recorded webinar, along with the presentation slides, will be available within a few weeks on generalmillsscf.com. At the end of today's webinar, we will have a Q&A period. You may submit questions, though, at any time during the webinar by using the chat feature located on the lower left-hand corner of your screen. After the webinar concludes, you will be asked to fill out a short survey, and you will be receiving an email with links to the slides and continuing education credit certificates within a week. Finally, we will be playing several video clips throughout today's webinar. The audio for these videos will come through your computer speakers. If you happen to be listening through a phone line, you are not going to be able to hear the video narrations during the webinar. Please hang with us through that silence. The live speakers will come back, and you will be able to access the recorded version of the webinar later to hear the video clips complete with the audio. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker is Margaret Roach. Margaret is a nutrition and dining consultant who for over 30 years has been bringing innovation to healthcare dining. Maggie and her team at Roach Dietitians create strategies that help senior living communities, hospitals, and other providers distinguish themselves through their dining services. With an understanding of the vital role that meals play in quality of life, health, and well-being, Roach Dietitians develop menus that reflect client values and hit high marks in resident and family satisfaction. Maggie is a registered dietitian with a master's degree in clinical nutrition. She has advanced credentials as a certified diabetes educator, is a board certified as a specialist in gerontological nutrition, and is distinguished as a fellow of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. During today's webinar, Maggie will be walking us through the new IDDSI framework, including testing methods for each level. Our second speaker is Chef Gilles Stassert. Chef Gilles is a corporate chef at General Mills supporting our healthcare channel and customers. At General Mills Food Service, Chef Gilles puts his extensive background in healthcare food service, banquets, hotels, fine dining, and in-home catering to task. Since joining the company in 2013, he has offered support, training, and inspiration to major food management companies, as well as operators within hospitals and senior living facilities, where he keenly recognizes the important role food plays in patient satisfaction and a guest's total experience. Chef Gilles draws on his experience in training and development, healthcare solutions, and recipe development to support General Mills food service customers. During today's webinar, you'll see Gilles in action in the kitchen demonstrating two different standard recipes that can easily be adjusted to fit into various IDDSI diet levels. Now, before I turn it over to Maggie, we want to get some details from all of you so we can be sure to customize today's information as much as possible to be applicable for this audience. So we would ask that you just take a moment and tell us about you and what your position is. And it'll take just a few minutes before we have some results. We have a large audience on the line, so we need to have everybody's responses come through the airwaves for us, and then we'll let you do the answers. Okay. We have a good number of registered dietitians as well as some other disciplines that are joining us. So again, we welcome you. And we have another question. We'd also like to know where you work. It's interesting how so many different places have the same problems, and yet we all have different and unique challenges and opportunities. And so we hope to be able to individualize some of what we do today according to your specific location. And here you'll see we have a good mixture of folks. Not surprisingly, hospitals and long-term care, as well as some other types of facilities. And one more question. We'd also like to know where you are on the IDDSI implementation timeline. And here again, there's no wrong answer. Everybody's at a little bit of a different learning curve. And if you're just starting, that's great. If you're well into implementation, that is more than wonderful also. And not surprising, most of you are aware, and you're in the starting phase. So that is a perfect segue to say we hope to bring you further along from where you are today. And with that, thanks so much for sharing. I will now turn it over to Maggie.
Thank you very much, Deborah. I'm delighted to be here and honored to be presenting for the esteemed Bell Institute. And thanks to all of you who have logged into this webinar. I think it was very interesting, the data we have. I love the poll. I love the technology. That's going to help me move forward in talking about IDDSI. And I am going to move the slides forward. Today we're going to start with defining dysphagia, and then from there I'll introduce the IDDSI framework and the rationale behind it. We'll explore each of the IDDSI diet levels as well as the corresponding testing methods, and along the way I'll be highlighting specific strategies and tips for IDDSI implementation. Chef Giles will conclude with some great recipes applying IDDSI principles as well as the testing methods. So those are our learning objectives. And I see that most of our participants today are dietitians, and as dietitians we're all very familiar with what dysphagia is, but I think for those who are not, I want to quickly review it so we're all on the same page. Dysphagia is difficulty or discomfort in swallowing. In other words, it takes more time and effort to move food or liquid from your mouth to your stomach. It can range from mild difficulty to complete and painful blockage. And of course, our concern is malnutrition and dehydration because people cannot eat as much as they normally could. Of course, aspiration, pneumonia, choking, even death is a concern. How prevalent is dysphagia? 30% or higher in the inpatient setting, and research shows that 33% of patients with dysphagia will develop pneumonia, which of course is a big concern for us. 60,000 individuals die each year from complications of dysphagia. By the way, that seemed like a really high number. I double-checked that statistic just this week, and I got that statistic from the Speech-Language Pathology Professional Association. Dysphagia is more common among older adults. Those of us who work in senior living know that, but of course, in the acute setting, you see plenty of older adults as well. Up to 68% of residents in long-term care have dysphagia. 30 to 38% of those living independently have dysphagia. And of course, older adults have an increased risk for dysphagia-related complications, such as pulmonary aspiration and choking. How do we manage dysphagia? Up to now, what we've been doing is thickening agents for fluids and using commercially manufactured thickening agents for fluids, or commercially manufactured thickened liquids. And what we've been doing up to now in terms of food texture modification is the National Dysphagia Diet. Many of us have been using multiple levels. Most of us use puree diets. We also have some type of mechanically altered, ground, chopped, cut up, etc., which of course is part of the problem, right? That we have a vast variety of ways of handling food texture modification for dysphagia. Now, I want to pause for a second to remind everyone that what we're talking about, of course, are therapeutic diets. And therapeutic diets are a dietary pattern used to treat a condition, and therefore they're prescribed by a physician. And anything that's prescribed by a physician, we as healthcare professionals or those of us who work in operations and dining services leaders or food and beverage leaders, we have to follow those physician orders, and we have to have some type of a clearly defined instruction of what that therapeutic diet is, and those instructions or those definitions need to be based on professional standards of practice. And for those of us who are licensed professionals, our state licensing regulations apply. So, for example, in many states, you have to be a licensed healthcare professional, namely a dietitian or perhaps a nurse or a physician, to work with what's known as medical nutrition therapy, to work with therapeutic diets or providing someone with a modification in their diet for a specific reason to treat a health condition. So I want to remind us all about this because we are going to bridge into a lot of culinary concepts, but we have to remember that we are still talking about therapeutic diets. And thus, this diet, our dysphagia diets, are based on standards, and we even have a standard for our general diet. So dysphagia diets are a modification of the general diet. So, for example, most of us who have a diet manual or a written record of how we write and plan our menus, we have a basis for our general diet. So, for example, I use the USDA MyPlate food plan for 75-year-old males and females when I plan menus for older adults. And I specify that I meet the RDI for the older adult. And in the hospital setting, we would, of course, do that across the board for all types of age groups. So our regular diet is based on a standard, and then, of course, our therapeutic diets are based on standards of practice as well. And that's why so many of us are switching over to IDDSI. Of course, in the dietetic world, the Academy has adopted IDDSI and has recommended that we start implementation as of last May 2019. And I always get the question, does that mean that we need to be implemented by May 2019? No. IDDSI has, the Academy has even clarified to say, as long as we are working towards using the IDDSI standards for dysphagia, we are all doing well. And I think our poll survey this morning really illustrates that most of us are at least thinking about moving in that direction. And I do want to say that implementation is could be a multi-year, certainly is a multidisciplinary approach. So it is prudent for us to take our time and get it right. So that brings us to where we are, and here is the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative Framework. So some may ask, where did this all come from? Why are we doing this now? This started several years ago, around 2013, 14, 15, and through there. The first framework came out in 2015, and there was a group of dysphagia professionals, a 12-member board, that got together and said, we need to standardize what we're doing for people for dysphagia. And they really took an ambitious approach in that they decided they wanted to do this on a global scale, so it would have to be culturally sensitive. They wanted it across all age groups, and they wanted to classify textured modified foods and thickened liquids. And to do this, they looked at all the existing practice data currently for dysphagia, and they also reviewed the current literature about dysphagia and really looked into things like choking, what causes, what kinds of foods do people choke on, how prevalent is it, etc. So they came up with their draft framework in 2015 and presented it for feedback. And since then, it has been a living document. And so that's another important point about IDDSI, is that you will see it evolving over time as we all use it. And those of you who have been doing this for a few years even know about what came out this last summer under 7. The diet level 7, we now have easy to chew, which is not a specific level. It's part of the regular diet, but is a modification 7 easy to chew. And we'll go into that in detail as I move forward. If you look at this graphic, you'll see that the framework has 9 levels. We're going to count the 2 that fall under 7, ranging from 0 for thin liquids to 7 for regular texture foods. Each level is distinctly identified with a color, a number, and a label. It's placed in the graphic. And the combination of the 3 identifiers will help limit errors in prescribing, identifying, preparing, and assembling dysphagia diet orders. And so all parts of this framework are important. And it's really fascinating to know that they worked really hard in terms of this visual to make sure that, for example, the colors that were selected are not colors that we normally see in a healthcare setting. You're not going to see, reds used a lot, or other colors that may be used in a clinical setting. They even went so far as to have specialists in color blindness look at the colors, so to make sure that people who are colorblind can make a distinction between the colors that are in the graphic representation of IDDSI. And you'll also notice that the colors and the number and the name, you will always see them that way every time we talk about a specific diet level. So, for example, soft and bite-sized will always be called soft and bite-sized. It will always be that distinct blue, and it will always be number 6. So we're already well on our way to a language that we can all use when we are describing textured modified foods and thickened liquids. And, of course, right now, many of us who do not use IDDSI in our institutions have all kinds of ways of talking about textured modified foods. And so what the framework does for us is it provides us a foundation for safety. It's really all about safety. So it's not only is there going to be a lot less confusion in terms of diet orders, etc., there is a basis of research that we're all working from. And it's not only research, but it's consensus and practice, et cetera. So when you see some of the changes that I'm going to describe for you in IDDSI, remember that it is about safety. And every recommendation that they've made, they've based on their review of the literature and the consensus that they've come from as they were, since 2015, and that they've been promoting the framework. And you'll see that we have evolved since then based on consensus and professional input. We're going to gain in clinical efficiency. Those of us who work across the continuum of care, we know that when we get patients that come from a hospital setting to a post-acute care setting, et cetera, our idea of a ground diet or a cut-up diet is different than somebody else's. And we spend a lot of time assessing, reassessing, and determining and verifying what the correct diet is for a person. And we will save some efficiencies there. And then, of course, there's a commercial implication for IDDSI in that we are now going to know that when we go to spec a product and to purchase a product, we're going to be able to look at the label and see that the manufacturer understands the same language we understand, the same guidelines that we understand, so that we are all on the same page for looking for how we define our thickened liquids and textured modified foods. All right, so there's the framework again, and you can see that we do have some the foods are on the left side, the liquids are on the right side, and we have some levels that share common characteristics. The puree diet and the liquidized diet share common characteristics with liquidized versions of those. Try not to get too hung up on that, because maybe some of you in an acute care setting may use all 9 levels. Most of us are going to use the levels that are appropriate for the populations we serve, and I'll get into the most common ones in a minute. But before that, I want to also point out what our role is and what the IDDSI board in their framework documents has described, and I'm taking this language from there in terms of what each of our roles are. So, for example, manufacturers are being asked to review, test, revise, reformulate products to reflect IDDSI framework. Also, provide resources, education, and training for customers. And I can tell you, since I've been involved with this since the beginning, this was a challenge for many manufacturers, and some have really taken leadership. For example, General Mills has taken the leadership position of being an IDDSI Gold sponsor and is looking to bring all of us together who are working in the field to gain a better understanding of IDDSI. And I think Chef Gilles has done a beautiful job, and you'll see his video on helping us use some of their products and implement the IDDSI diets. Now, we as food service professionals, we need to adapt to the new terminology. We need to embrace the testing methods. And we need to get a sense of how we are going to implement IDDSI for our, I'm sorry, I lost my slide for a second there. Okay, I'm back. So we need to embrace the testing methods, product specifications. So we will use IDDSI levels when we're speccing products, during meal preparation, and at the point of use. Okay. For more information of some of the things that I just spoke with you about, you can go directly to the IDDSI.org website. I'm sure all of you have seen that. And that is where you will find the framework. The framework is the graphic that I just showed you, as well as each and every diet level, all 9, have a very specific descriptor and testing method to correspond with each level. And I will go through each of them with you today. I also want to remind you to frequent the website, especially sign up for the IDDSI e-bites. That's where you find out when changes happen. Again, remember, this is a living document. They don't change it a lot, but in the last 2 years, they have changed a few little, they've added the easy, ready to chew, or regular, easy to chew diet level, and they also provide clarifications, which have been very helpful, and I'll show a few of those to you as well. Okay, let's talk about the testing methods. That's new to us, and it can be a little overwhelming because there's a lot of people that we need to train about these testing methods, but again, it's helping us provide safety, and it's also empowering those who are preparing and serving textured modified foods to make sure that really they are hitting the mark in terms of the characteristics of the texture that is appropriate for, that has been determined to be appropriate for that specific patient or resident. So what are we looking for when we're testing? Well, we've got a syringe test that I'll show you that's going to show us viscosity or thickness of liquids. We're going to use a fork and use something called the fork drip test to determine how thick certain foods are. Are they too thick? Are they too thin? The fork is a very simple way to determine that. We're also going to use the fork to determine the softness of food. We can put some pressure on the food using the tines of a fork, and the kind of resistance we get will tell us how soft that food is. We'll be able to see how sticky a food is, and that's a new concept for us. By putting a food on a spoon, tilting and flicking the spoon a little bit, see how much residue is left, and that will kind of mimic a stickiness test. And then, of course, we're going to be very clear about the size of the particle of foods now. We're not going to just say ground, cut up, etc. We're going to be specific in terms of the size of the particle of food, and we're going to use the tines of a fork to determine that. So now we've got something to work with, and I think it's very empowering to use the testing. start with the drinks, because that, I think, is easiest for us to understand. Many organizations aren't even thickening their own liquids. They're using thickened liquids that are commercially prepared. What was formerly known as thin liquid, or what we refer to as water, right, is considered thin. That stays the same. And then we had something, sometimes, especially in a pediatric setting, they would thicken infant formulas, or some foods were naturally thick liquids. That is now going to be referred to as slightly thick. Nectar thick is now going to be referred to as mildly thick, and will be associated with the number 2. So you can see already we're getting the standardization is starting to flow. Honey thick will always be 3, moderately thick. Spoon thick will be 4, extremely thick. Moderately thick will always be that specific version of yellow gold. Mildly thick will always be that specific color pink. So now we've got a framework that we can all talk about thickened liquids in a language that we can all talk about thickened liquids the same way. And of course, this is how they're represented on the framework. From there, you'll see, if you go into the framework, there are specific descriptors, and each descriptor will give a characteristic of the particular level. So, for example, number 2, mildly thick, flows off a spoon, it's sippable, pourable, and pours quickly from a spoon, but slower than thin drinks. Effort is required to drink this thickness through a standard bore straw. And then they will also give you the physiological rationale for this level of thickness. IDDSI has prepared some excellent resources for thickened liquids. There's an entire webinar on their website for those of you who do thicken your own liquids that is really excellent and very complete. And they also have this resource that I'm going to share with you on illustrating how the differences in time through a syringe will determine how thick, how to rate the thickness of a liquid. And I think Jill is going to play this video for you right now. And Jill, I think we're going to play it twice. All right, again, this came from IDDSI. We're comparing level 1 through 4 of thickened liquids, 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's your 10 cc or 10 milliliter syringe, 10 seconds on the clock, and you can see how 1 is just running, that's water. And look at the difference between 2 and 3 in terms of the drip. Now they stopped, and those levels show you how much liquid is left in the syringe, will tell you what your liquid level is. All right, let's do it one more time, Jill, if you don't mind. There we go. This is great for training. 1, 2, 3, and 4. We've got 10 seconds on the clock. Kind of focus on 2 and 3. Focus your eye on 2 and 3. Those are probably the levels you're using the most. And see how much liquid is left in the syringe when we're done. And then you're going to see a graphic pop up on the right, and that's how you know what level. So you see how helpful the colors and the numbers are. Okay, great. Thank you, Jill. All right, I'm going to show you Liquidized Level 3, the testing method for it. We won't go into it in great detail, but I just think it's interesting because, of course, many of us will be using Level 3 thickened liquids, and this test was really developed for the liquidized diet, which many of us have referred to in the past as the blenderized diet, but you can use the 4 test here if you're in a pinch, and it shows you that the liquids will drip slowly or in dollops or strands through the slots of a fork. So I just wanted to point that out for you. But now we're going to move on to the food. This is where it gets a little bit complicated in that it's not as simple as the liquids. It's not as simple as, hey, we're cleaning up our language and terminology here. There really is a shift in how we're defining the diet levels and what we're looking for in terms of the characteristics of the food. So of course, a regular diet is a regular diet, but the dysphagia, the National Dysphagia Diet, Dysphagia Advanced Diet, I guess we could call that soft and bite-sized. That's what most closely corresponds. Dysphagia mechanically altered most closely corresponds to minced and moist, but you're going to see that there are some distinct differences. And pureed is pretty close. Liquidized is what we formerly were referring to as blenderized. So let's get into it. Let's look at the pureed level diets, and we'll talk specifically about food. Most of us, if not all of us, are already preparing pureed foods for dysphagia. I underlined here the differences in red because, again, you can look at this framework yourself and the guidelines, and you're going to see how it's described. Of course, it doesn't require chewing, and it has no lumps in it, etc. But the first underlined segment there falls off the spoon in a single spoonful when tilted and continues to hold shape on a plate. Now, of course, continues to hold shape on a plate is fine. We're used to that. We don't like our purees runny. But this whole concept of it can come off the side of a spoon means that it's not sticky. Another new thing is that the liquid must not separate from the solid. And we're getting into the concept of mixed consistency. So even if someone is on a pureed diet with thin liquids, the idea of putting thin liquids in with the food can, for the lack of a better term, confuse the swallow, so to speak. And that might be more difficult for someone to swallow, even though may be able to drink water or coffee in its regular thin form. So we're going to be looking out for separate thin liquids. Gravies are kind of an issue when it comes to pureed foods because our gravy can't be any thinner than the puree. Everything has to be pureed. So, for example, what we're doing with our pureed recipes is we are just incorporating the gravy flavors into the pureed foods. Some people are making a pureed thick gravy and layering it on top of the foods. But these are new concepts for us that we have to kind of wrap our head around. So here is how we determine that those characteristics are met. One way is with this fork drip test. Now, I showed you the level 3 liquidized diet fork drip test, and you can see you've got a much different looking product here. The pureed foods are supposed to sit on a mound on top of the fork, and then a small amount may flow through like a little tail underneath, but it doesn't dollop, flow, or drip continuously. And I'll tell you, when I first saw this, I was like, okay, I think we can do this, but then when you start testing it, that's when you gain your confidence. So get a fork out. Even today, if you are working with food today and you're making purees, you don't have to do anything different. Just observe how well you meet the current IDDSI criteria. Get a fork out and see if your pureed foods look like that. And then get a spoon out and see, does the food slip off the spoon well? This is like a perfect, beautiful, ideal world example of the spoon tilt test. I'm going to show you a few others. You can see on the bottom right corner there, that one, the food, you can see a film of food. In my experience, you see this more often than not. You always don't get a clean spoon. And by the way, when it comes to the IDDSI's website and getting on their mailing list, this picture came through in July of this year to provide clarification that yes, the spoon doesn't have to be squeaky clean like the one above. So here's an example of an unsafe spoon tilt test, and of course this is peanut butter. Peanut butter meets all the criteria when you think about it. No thin liquid, sits up on the spoon, on the fork. It would pass the fork drip test, but it's too sticky. And this is just a good illustration of that. All right. So let's move on. Now we're getting into some new territory. Minced and moist. Minced and moist is represented with the orange color, level 5. Again, many of us are used to working with some mechanically ground food and soft food, but minced and moist foods are always soft and moist. Again, this concept, no separate thin liquids for adults it's equal to less than 4 millimeters width and no longer than 15 millimeters in length. Pediatrics, it's half of that. It's soft in that the lumps are easy to squash with a tongue. So it's soft, it's moist, and it's minced. These are the three main characteristics of minced and moist. And here's how we test for it. This is interesting. Did you know that on a global basis, most forks have about 4 millimeters between the tines of the fork? So we're going to use that as a measurement. So you can see the picture on the left. The food is perfectly fitting between the tines of the fork. It can be a little bit long, and I'll show you a video of it. And so if you have the length between 4 tines of fork, it's between 12 and 16 millimeters. So it's between tines, and the length of the whole fork will give you a sense of the size that you need to be with in minced and moist. So you can see how this testing is very accessible. And it takes time to kind of wrap your head around it, but once you work with it, you have to put the food, in your hand, in front of you with a fork in your hand and test the food. So there's for the size of minced and moist. But remember, the food is soft and easily mashed with the fork, and you use that fork, you put enough pressure on the fork without your nail bed turning white. So this is another kind of nuance of the testing. You're not really digging your fork, your thumb on the fork so hard that the nail bed is turning white as much as it's more of a gentle. And by the way, they did some research, the IDDSI board did research on the amount of pressure that using pressure testing devices that your thumb uses without the nail bed turning white is about the same pressure that your tongue would use to break up food. So there is some scientific reasoning behind this. So let me show you this in action. Again, this is a video that IDDSI produced that's freely available on their website today. And Jill, you can go ahead and start that. And I think we'll only need to look at it once. See that's a longer particle. You can see where the 4 by 16 milliliter, and of course millimeter, and of course for pediatrics it would be twice in size. There's not any thin liquid weeping onto the plate. It's moist. You can tell it's moist because it's holding together on the plate there. Sometimes you need to use even a gelatin slurry to get things to hold. Now this is a starchy item, and so it holds pretty well. All right, let's talk about some more testing for minced and moist. Again, it can't be sticky, so you're going to see the same testing. You're going to use a spoon tilt test for that. This is a graphic that I got from the IDDSI website that can be used for training. It talks about the millimeter size, and it just summarizes for minced and moist. It's 3 things. I added the labeling on the bottom. The fork tine test, the fork pressure test, and the spoon tilt test are all used together. All right. Now let's talk about soft and bite size. That's the level 6. Soft and bite-sized can be mashed or broken down. Again, it's soft with the pressure from the fork or spoon, meaning you take the side of a fork or a spoon and it should be easy to break down that food. It's moist. However, it does not have separate thin liquids. And the size is 15 millimeters or 1.5 centimeter pieces, diced or bite-sized, for adults, and half of that, 8 millimeter pieces, for the pediatric population. Now, this is interesting because many of us have worked with CHOP diets, right? And we know about, and maybe we just said CHOP diet, chop the food up. Some of us were more specific in our diet manuals, and we might have said, okay, 1/2 inch size. But we maybe did not address the issue of softness and moistness. So even this is soft and bite-sized. Think about, a chicken breast. If it's not tender enough to break that chicken breast up with the side of a fork or spoon, then in most cases you're going to need to grind it. But then even if you grind it or not, it has to be moist, but not so moist that it has thin liquids running separate from it, and it has to be of a 1/2 inch size or smaller. So that's a good way to think of it, 1/2 inch size or smaller. All right, so food can be mashed without returning to its original shape. So it can be mashed or diced, but anytime you should be able to mash the food. You don't have to present it mashed. You can present it diced, but it has to be able to be mashed without returning to its original shape. Now you can use a little bit more pressure. If you want to use some pressure and the nail bed turns white, that's fine. And the food should be able to be broken up into pieces with a fork or the side of a spoon. And I love this illustration. I think all of you could use this in your training. Bananas are a beautiful example of this. So this is why we have testing, because you can put diced banana on a menu, and that would make perfect sense to be appropriate for a soft and bite-sized diet. Well, what if the bananas happen to be a little more green that day? And all of us have had bananas that have been pretty hard to mash, that you really have to put some force into it to mash it. And so this illustrates the reason why we need to test at the time of preparation and at the time of service, because we want to make sure that that food item is actually soft and able to be mashed or broken up. And of course, meat is a perfect example of that. You know, we might have the greatest intentions in the world in terms of preparing tender meat, and maybe if it's held and by the time it gets in front of that patient or resident, it may not be mashable. It could be dried out. So again, you should be able to 1/2 inch or smaller, and you should be able to mash it or squash it without it returning to its original shape. All right, that was soft and bite size. Now let's talk about regular, easy to chew. Regular, easy to chew is, like I said, it's brand new, and it came about because many people felt like with the minced and moist, or even soft and bite size, every single item needs to be of that particular size. Remember, it has to do with size, softness, and moisture. So the size on minced and moist, everything, your pasta, your vegetables, your fruit, everything has to be minced. And with soft and bite size, everything has to be either mashed, or at least a 1/2 inch in size or smaller. Again, pasta, vegetable, fruit. Many of us work with individuals who tolerate foods of different sizes. They just need soft, easy-to-chew food. They don't necessarily have a swallowing problem. They don't necessarily have dysphagia. And so that's why the regular diet modification, meaning it's still the regular diet, but we're talking and defining easy to chew. And that's how that came to be. So easy to chew is normal, everyday foods of soft, tender textures that are developmentally and age-appropriate for those of us who work in pediatrics, and it requires biting and chewing ability. And that's real important. And if you go into the depths of this aspect of the diet, you'll see that IDDSI is very clear about it's important that we carefully monitor individuals and be sure that those individuals who are on a regular, easy-to-chew diet are able to safely swallow foods and able to identify, okay, this might be a bigger piece of food and I need to be able to bite off a piece, and I need to be able to chew that piece and swallow it safely. Because there's a lot of mixture in the size of foods that are offered. So the regular diet is everyday foods, various textures, etc., and no specific testing requirements. But easy to chew has the, again, requirement of soft, and it has to be able to be somewhat, they don't say mashable, but they say the food can be easily broken apart with the side of a fork or a spoon. So it still requires some biting and chewing ability. So that was a lot. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you this summary chart to consider. I created this to help myself, and the dietitians on my team, we use this when we're writing recipes or even just talking to each other about IDDSI, because sometimes you think, well, wait, what was the testing measure on that? So think of it this way. You've got your three main categories. 1, observational, 2, a fork, 3, a spoon. So let's go through it. Liquidized diet, again, there's not a lot of use of it, but I think it's helpful from a just thinking about IDDSI. So by appearance, it's smooth with no bits. Again, with appearance, for pureed foods, no lumps. It might sit up nicely on the plate. Minced and moist, we can look at the food particle size using the tines of a fork, and we can look and see that there's no separate thin liquids. Soft and bite size, again, ½ inch or smaller. It's adults, pediatrics, it's half that size. Again, I'm seeing that there's no thin liquids. And regular, easy to chew, it can be any size. Now, who uses the fork drip test? Well, that's liquidized. And remember, liquidized in a pinch, you could probably use that for your level 3 thickened liquids. But we use the fork drip test for the puree diet. Slight tail, no drip. Sits on a nice mound on top of the fork. Spoon tilt, it's not sticky. That's your pureed and minced and moist. Holds its shape. You can flick it. And you may see a little film of food remaining. Fork pressure test. Liquidized, you wouldn't even bother, but there is a standard in that you wouldn't see any type of resistance from the fork or any kind of a mark left, meaning. On purees, again, I don't train for a fork pressure test for puree, but IDDSI does discuss it, and it does leave a clear pattern, and the food will briefly maintain that indentation. But we really use the fork pressure test for minced and moist, soft and bite-sized, regular, easy to chew. For minced and moist, it's light pressure, and the food will soften and break up nicely. With soft and bite-sized and easy to chew, it's the side of the fork and spoon, and that will break food up nicely, and it will be mashed without returning to its original shape. I also did a chart on the moderately thick and extremely thick liquids, but I think typically in the field, we're not using a lot of extremely thick liquids, but basically it doesn't, as you saw from the syringe test, it doesn't really move much in a syringe because it really doesn't pour. It should, by definition, is not pourable. So for extremely thick liquids, you could use the pureed tests. All right. There are tools from IDDSI to help you evaluate where you're at. And for those of you who are just learning about IDDSI or just thinking about getting started, I find that the best place to start is to just see where you're at. This is a tool, an audit tool. There's one page for each diet level. I would recommend actually you start with 4 pureed. But this is also a nice training tool because it summarizes each one of the tests and the characteristics of each one of the foods that you're looking for. So I encourage you to take a really good look at these audit tools, and it kind of summarizes everything you need for each one of the diet levels. What I did for my group was I combined all of these on one form so that we have each one page, and you can do more than one foods and cover each diet level. Otherwise, in this situation, it's one page per food per diet level. But as you're getting ready to implement IDDSI, you need this because this, again, helps you become familiar with working with the specific diet levels. All right, and I think you all think I might have forgot about something, and I didn't. We need to talk about bread. I pulled bread out separately because this is such a paradigm shift for us, bread. And for those of you who don't know, bread is considered acceptable only for the regular diet. So that's a change for us. And what are we going to do about bread? So what are we going to do about sandwiches, etc.? So, for example, minced and moist, we all get the concept of ground foods. Think about a tuna salad sandwich with no onions and celery in it, or even more specifically, egg salad. a beautiful egg salad sandwich. We've served egg salad sandwiches for eons, right? And we serve that to people who have chewing and swallowing problems. The literature shows that people choke on bread. Bread is sticky, it's gummy, it gets gummier and stickier the wetter it gets and the more you move it around in your mouth. And so the decision was made not in a willy-nilly way, but in a scientific way, and through the literature and through consensus, that bread is not acceptable for minced and moist. It's not acceptable for soft and bite-sized. Think about it. Based on the size of the particles, okay, you could chop up some bread and serve these half-inch pieces, but when you go to mash a piece of bread, it does not stay mashed. You get it wet, it gets gummier. So that's been a challenge for us, and Chef Giles is going to show you a few examples of what to do with a muffin that I think is beautiful. So we have some options. It's just a different way of thinking about bread products. And so I bring you to these frequently asked questions on the IDDSI website as a resource. They explain it in great detail. And again, it's just something we just have to get used to thinking about. Now, this is the other thing about IDDSI. IDDSI is to be followed as written. It's a standard diet. We are not to say, well, our version, or our institution's version of soft and bite size includes bread, because that's not what IDDSI says. So we have to follow, again, and we're all called to follow our professional standards of practice. The Academy has adopted this. Speech-language pathology group has adopted this. So we want to be able to point our finger to what standards we're using. And so when we're using IDDSI, we don't modify it. But of course, we all have professional judgment, and there's going to be individuals who can tolerate bread, and that should be done on an individualized basis, not across the board for the diet. By the way, bread is probably the reason why the easy, regular-to-chew diet was developed. So that's bread. I refer you to these resources if you need more info. I want to quickly run through some suggestions on implementation. I've done whole seminars on this, so it's hard to boil it down to one slide, but here's my attempt at it for you. 1, get to know the IDDSI website and its resources. 2, form an interdisciplinary IDDSI implementation team. I'm telling you, there is no way we're super capable people, we dining and dietetics professionals, and we know we can tackle any kind of a challenge. But it's very important to have other disciplines involved in this, because when you think about diet orders and feeding and food service, etc., there's all kinds of disciplines. For those of us who work in senior living, marketing, executive directors, etc., everyone needs to be involved in this. This is probably one of the biggest shifts in therapeutic diets I've seen in my 30 years of dietetics. Up there, the same as when we went to carbohydrate counting and diabetic diets. So this is a big deal, and so take your time and get it right. I do want to say something, though, about the dietitian culinary team. So many of us have worked together our entire careers, right? This is such a wonderful opportunity to take the best of what dietitians do and the best of what chefs and culinary and operations people do, and really get together and create a solution for dysphagia. And you'll see that when you hear from Chef Giles shortly, some of the great solutions that he's come up with. So spread the word, educate key stakeholders, and enlist a champion. Get someone outside of your department to be involved and interested and to champion IDDSI. Evaluate your current diets, food, and drinks. Test and map your existing products to determine the IDDSI level using IDDSI audit tool. So that tool that I just showed you, if you don't know where to start, pull up the pureed audit tool, get a fork, get a spoon, and start testing where you're at. And see if you can just slowly improve your pureed diets. Start with thickened liquids. Get some of your diet orders changed. Do a transitional period of time. Most of your, if not all of your commercially prepared thickened liquids should have both the old terminology and the IDDSI terminology on there. Do it in transition or in a stepwise fashion. So start with purees, start with thickened liquids. Then, and this is the part that really takes the work, is you have to get all of your dietetic tools together, your diet manual, your menu items, your product specifications, and your recipes. Then you need to establish your testing processes and training standards, and this will be an ongoing thing, right? We're going to be training and testing IDDSI foods now forever. And don't go it alone. And I know you're not because you're here today. Get some resources, talk amongst yourselves. I'm on a few groups where we get together regularly and talk about what we're doing. I've got a local dietitian who runs a huge rehab center who I talk with regularly about what she's doing, and we share ideas. So, again, it's not going to be simple, but I think it's worth it in terms of the safety that we're going to be able to provide those we serve, as well as the consistency in the products that we offer. I briefly and quickly want to show you that there are standardized abbreviations. We use them all the time in my group now, and I find them very helpful. This slide, everything below the green arrow I got from the IDDSI website. The part with the green arrow, we made that because this segment was prepared by IDDSI before the Easy to Chew diet was brought out, but I just want to point that out that there's that. And there's lots of tools. This is a little bit busy, but it does help break it all down for you in terms of all the components of IDDSI. And then lastly, I feel that I need to put in a little bit of a plug about the role of the dietitian because this is a complex concept, but we're good at translating concepts that are complex through execution. Working with dietitians gives people peace of mind because we know we've got the safety, the accuracy, and the regulatory standards in place. And working together from an interdisciplinary approach, a organization can really distinguish themselves. Because as we work with IDDSI, we really, and I just have had this experience personally, you become masterful at it the more and more you work with it. And implementing all the way through to the testing methods throughout your organization really demonstrates your authority, and it communicates to people that you've got this, that you're going to take care of your patients and your residents who have dysphagia in a safe and consistent way. Okay, and then lastly, just want to invite you to visit our website. We've got some resources for you that we're excited about. Please feel free to reach out to me personally anytime. I'm on LinkedIn. You can also reach me at my website. This is one of my favorite topics, as you might be able to tell, and it's been a great pleasure to share all of this with you, and I hope to continue our conversation as we move forward in our IDDSI journey. So from here, Chef Gilles is going to share with you some of the culinary components of IDDSI that he has developed for us.
Good morning and welcome in the General Mills Culinary Center. My name is Gilles Stassert and I'm one of the corporate chefs here, and in the next few minutes I'm going to take you through different recipe modifications that you can do in your facility to help your patients with dysphagia. We're going to go through the level 7 through level 4 of the new IDDSI guidelines with two of our new recipes. The first one is going to feature our orange blossom muffin, and we're going to make this recipe first of all for your general population at a level 7, and then through simple modification, I'm going to take you through level 6, 5, and 4. Once we're done with the muffin, we're going to switch to a simple parfait using our new blueberry parfait pro yogurt, as well as some Czech cereal, and then the other flavor that's going to come in this parfait is going to be some peaches. So let's get going. Okay, so the first step we're going to do is focus on our level 7 IDDSI guideline, which is our regular diet. So we're going to take our orange blossom muffin tube set here and simply put it in our lined muffin tin. To do so, you just have to thaw the batter, which takes about 2 hours at room temperature or overnight in the cooler. And then we just open the bag, such as this. Do a low hole, not too big, otherwise it's going to the flow is going to be too big and go everywhere. And then you simply start pouring in each little cup. If you don't want to use muffin liners, you can just spray your pan and that will do the same. If you want to go extra fancy, you can use tulip liner. And this is going to be the base of our recipe for all the different levels we are going to modify later on. Try to keep the batter off the pan so that it doesn't burn while it bakes later on. All right. Now that your tin is fully filled, you are ready to go to the oven. Make sure that your oven is preheated before you put it in. All right, so here are our orange blossom muffins after we bake them. There's a few important steps that we should be talking about. First of all, when baking a product that you're going to later on transform into different level of the new IDDSI guideline, you should make sure that the top or side of any baked goods is not too crunchy or overdone. By that, I mean that you should be able to push to it and it should kind of fall apart. You don't want it to be too hard that when you try to moisten it later, it doesn't absorb the liquid and still stays crispy for the patient to swallow. Second, you need to make sure that those muffins or baked goods you are making do not have large particulates such as fruits or seeds. So let's open this one, for example, and you can see that it does not have any particulates or any seeds or nuts, which means that this will be a perfect muffin to modify to a level 6, 5, and 4. So let's get going. So let's get going with our orange blossom muffin level 6. We are going to need our orange blossom muffins, obviously. Next, we need a cutting board. There it is. A knife, and our milk that has been thickened with a starch thickener. You take this muffin and then you're going to just dice it in pieces that are 0.5 inches or smaller. The smaller part is very important, so 0.5 inches would be the biggest piece you would want in this particular application. So you just cut them in the small diced up pieces, such as this. And then we are going to place the muffin in a bowl and incorporate our milk so that it can absorb it. Once we are done chopping our muffin into those ½ inch or smaller pieces, we are going to place them in a bowl and top it with a 1/4 cup of thickened milk to start. So here's our thickened milk. I will measure a 1/4 cup. Here you go. As you can see, it is definitely thicker than normal milk. And then I'm going to drizzle it on all over our muffin that we just diced. It is very important that the muffin is fully hydrated before you serve it. So if some instance you need to add additional milk or let it sit longer, that is absolutely what you should be doing. Now we have our milk, our muffin. We are just going to stir it slowly and gently to try to keep a little bit of the integrity of the muffin, but also make sure that we hydrate every piece of the muffin. What I'm going to do next is let it sit for a few minutes to make sure that it's fully absorbed before we place it on a plate and serve it to our patient. All right, so we have now let our muffin sit for a few minutes, and you can see that this is exactly what you are looking for. One of the important things to notice is that the liquid is totally absorbed in the muffin. What you do not want is to have extra liquid at the bottom or on the side, or the muffin to be too dry. You want to make sure that the consistency is perfect, such as this, where all the liquid has been absorbed, and also that the muffin is nice and soft. To present this and make it somewhat appealing to your patient, I actually use, in some occasion, a muffin liner. And what we're going to do is simply take our muffin and scoop it in the liner, such as you would do for a patient with a regular diet. You can simply serve this along with a spoon, and it will be a little bit more pleasant of an experience for your patient. There you go. All right, let's move on to level 5. Using the same orange blossom muffin, what we're going to need to do is simply break it apart and pulse it for a few seconds to make it into the size of a breadcrumb or smaller. Remember that level 5 needs to be 4 millimeter in size or smaller. So let's make sure that we get it to that size when we pulse it. All right, so let's see how we did with our pieces, reminding you all that we should have pieces of 4 millimeter or smaller in size. And one of the easy tricks to kind of double check that is to take a fork, put some of the muffin on your hand, for example, or just on the side of the bowl, and make sure that all the pieces of the grinded up or pulsed muffin fit in between the teeth of the fork. In this particular case, you can tell that they are much smaller than the teeth of the fork, so we did very good. The next step, such as level 6, is going to add our thickened milk to it. So here I have it. A great tip, though, that you can use is if instead of using milk, you want to use juices, for example, to complement the flavor of the dish you are serving, you certainly can use thickened juices. The advantage of using the milk, however, is that you are adding some of those great nutritionals that your patients may be needing. So here we have it. We're adding the milk, and just like we did for level 6, we are going to stir the muffin and the milk together to make sure that every little piece of it gets hydrated, and we will then let it sit for a few minutes and then come back to it and make sure that all the milk has been absorbed and that we are ready to serve it to our patient. All right, it's been a few minutes that our level 5 orange blossom muffin has been sitting, so let's take a look at it. And as you can see, all the thickened milk has been absorbed, which is great. That's exactly what you want. And it doesn't feel dry or anything like that. So another test that you can do at this point is take a spoon, simply grab a little bit of the muffin, and then you're going to drop it gently. And if you have nothing or almost nothing left on the spoon, such as this, you did a fantastic job. So now we are ready to serve it to our patient. So let's grab a bowl and simply serve the muffin, trying to make it, look somewhat nice and appetizing by shaping it a little bit in the shape of a muffin always helps. And one of the things that you can do at this level still is garnish the muffin with some really fine spices. In this particular case, with the orange, you could use a little bit of cinnamon to amplify the flavor of the orange, or anything of that nature in the spice category. Ground cardamom would be really good too. You just want to make sure that you don't introduce any particulates to the dish. All right, let's get moving to our level 4 orange blossom muffin. This one is actually my favorite because it kind of tastes like a smoothie, so it's really delicious. We're going to start with a half a cup of our milk, just regular milk this time around. This is for 2 muffins, by the way, so you would only do a quarter cup if you were doing 1, but due to the size of my blender, I'm doing 2 at the time. Then we're going to add 10 ounces of the Yoplait Parfait Pro Vanilla Yogurt. There you go. Make sure you grab it all for the recipe to be correct, and the nutritionals as well. And then right on top of the liquids, I'm going to put the 2 muffins that I just cut in half so that they break down easier. The reason why I put the liquids down first is so that it mixes right away and we don't get any gumminess from the muffin stuck to the bottom of the blender. All right, I think we are all set. So let's take a look at what we did. So I'll just grab a spoon and just kind of stir in there and see. There's no particulate whatsoever left. So we are ready to go and do the fork test. What I like to do is take a fork and then grab a little bit of the recipe. And what it should do is stay on top of the fork and not fall through. It definitely doesn't fall on this particular case and stays on the top of the fork. All right, so now that we did our testing, we are ready to serve our level 4 orange blossom muffin. And as you can recall, I had done 2 portions using 2 muffins. So I'm just going to serve about half of this for 1 patient. And as you can see, while pouring this, there's definitely no particulate left or anything of the matter, and the consistency is perfect for your patient to enjoy. So there you go. All right, let's move on to another recipe on today's webinar. For this recipe, we are going to need some Blueberry Parfait Pro, which is a new product that we have, with some peaches, a little bit of rice check, and as a garnish, we're going to use some ground cinnamon that will increase the flavor of this delicious parfait. You need to know also that any Parfait Pro that's available on our line meets the level 4, 5, 6, and obviously 7 of these new IDDSI guidelines. First, what you need to do is obviously open the bag so that you can pour the yogurt into the cup. Very easy, such as this. And then just hold it from the back and on the side here and pour the amount that is recommended in the recipe. And for this one, it's about 4 ounces. Then we're going to layer it with 1/3 of a cup of peaches, which I've already diced and measured over here. So we'll put those nicely on top of the yogurt. And then we're going to top it with 1/4 cup of our rice checks, which will be really nice and give a little bit of texture to this parfait for the level 7. And then I like to add a little bit of kick of some spice on top, so I'll just do a little pinch of ground cinnamon. There you go. Here it is, your blueberry and peach parfait. All right, let's now move on to the level 6 of our blueberry and peach parfait. So what I've done is I took the canned peaches and I've diced them in a piece that is 1/2 inch or smaller. What you can do is take a fork, and then you need to make sure that each piece of the peaches are smaller than 3 prongs of the fork. So in this case, we are right there at the 1/2 inch. So just make sure that they are 1/2 inch or smaller. We're going to layer the parfait by doing the yogurt first, such as for level 7. So we're starting with our 4 ounces of yogurt. There you go. We can put that right back here. And then what we are going to do that's different than with our level 7 is put the cereal in between the yogurt and peaches. This is especially important if you're going to serve this parfait right out of the kitchen right now. If you made them in advance, you may get away with putting the cereal on top, because while in the refrigerator, they would get softer. So we have our yogurt at the bottom, our cereal that have been crunched up in between the layers, and we finally going to top the cereal with our diced peaches. There you go. And to finish this beautiful parfait, we are going to just do a little pinch of cinnamon as a garnish. There you go. This is our level 6 blueberry and peach parfait. All right, let's move on to the level 5 of our blueberry and peach parfait. What's very important in this specific level 5 application is that the particulates you're incorporating in the parfait are 4 millimeters or smaller. So we are going to have to pulse our peaches and make sure that they are 4 millimeters or smaller. It shouldn't take very long, but it is very important to look and make sure that every single piece has been pulsed. In this case, I can tell that there's still a couple larger pieces, such as this one. So we're going to put everything back in there and pulse it a couple more times. All right, let's take a look. Perfect. We are good. The pieces are all really small. It's not quite a puree, but they are small enough for this particular level 5 application. So I'll take this bowl out of the way. And all you have to do is simply build the parfait the way you have done it for level 7 and 6 with the omission of our cereal, because they would not fit this category. So let's go ahead and do 4 ounces of our blueberry yogurt once again. And then we are simply going to top it with our peach pulsed peaches, should I say. I'm just going to drizzle that right on top. Try to not put any of the peaches on the side of the glass. Make it look nice for everybody. And what I like to do is just make sure it goes all the way towards the edge. That way you have a little bit of a bite of the yogurt and the peach with every single bite. And then as a garnish, we'll just take a little bit of our cinnamon once again and do a little pinch on top. And there you have it, our level 5 blueberry and peach parfait. All right, let's go ahead and do our level 4 blueberry and peach parfait. So for this particular recipe, we are going to need to blend our peach all together. Make sure that there's no particulate whatsoever left in it. So let's cover it and get going. All right, let's see how we did here. Perfect, so they are perfectly pureed, and there's definitely no chunk left, but what you can see is that it is way too thin to meet our level 4 requirement. So what we have to do next is pour our pureed peaches into a separate bowl, and then we are going to have to thicken it until it meets that level 4 requirement, which is like mashed potato consistency. So here I'll add a little bit of our starch first. It's definitely going to need a little bit more than that, so there you go. We'll stir it up, and what's also important is to let it sit for a few seconds after you stir it, because it gets thicker as time lapses. All right, so you can see that our starch has been incorporated in the peaches. And then you can see that when you take a big spoon of it and drop it, it comes out in a big lump. So this will be perfect for our level 4 dysphagia with the new IDDSI guideline. So let's get this parfait built. As for level 7, 6, and 5, we start with our 4 ounces of yogurt. There we go, at the bottom of our beautiful cup. And then we are going to layer it with our thickened peach puree right here on top of it. You know, we always eat with our eyes first, so try to make it look just as beautiful as for the level 7. There you go. And then I will simply garnish it once again with our ground cinnamon. There you go, beautiful. And this is our level 4 blueberry and peach parfait. All right, look at how much fun we had today. Using the same exact item you already have on your menu, we were able to simply modify it to our level 4, 5, 6, and obviously the level 7 you already have. Here's a low and quick recap. So our orange blossom muffin then turned into a level 6. Over here you've got the level 5, and finally here in the smoothie form you've got the level 4. And finally on this side, the parfait that everybody already loves is simply turned from your level 7 to the 6, and by simply pulsing and pureeing it, you can have the level 5 and 4 as well. So any challenge can be resolved by doing some very small adjustment to the recipe you already have, and you do not need to go out and buy a lot of new ingredients to be able to succeed with the new IDDSI guidelines. Thank you for stopping by.
All right, and right here on this next slide, you can see a link to our website. So if you go to generalmillscf.com and do the /dysphagia, you will be able to see the new recipes that were developed for this webinar, as well as some additional recipes that are already part of our collection. You can see that they're also divided in meal parts, and you can search them by product as well. So do not hesitate to go to the website and check out what we have to offer. I will now pass it back to Deb for a question and answer session.
Thanks, Maggie and Jill, for that great content. We're now going to start the Q&A segment. We've got several questions in the queue here, and thank you all for your participation and engagement. As a reminder, for those of you who would still like to submit a question, please use that chat feature located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. And Maggie, I want to send the first question your way. Could you clarify the level 5 fork test in terms of how it can be used for both checking 4 millimeter width as well as that 15 millimeter length?
Yes. I think there was some question about even with the video, was the video really the correct size of the pasta that we showed? And the width is 4 millimeters. And there might be some confusion because originally the framework said for minced and moist just 4 millimeters, but the audit tool said 4 millimeters by 15 or 16, actually it's 16 millimeters in length. So they updated the framework in July to say 4 by 16. So if the distance between two tines of the fork is 4 milliliters, the distance between 4 tines of forks should be 16 millimeters. You have to take into account the tine itself. So we say about 3 tine fork distance is equivalent to around 15 or 16 millimeters. That way you're not getting a ruler out. So you're looking at the food being soft enough to squish and fit between those tines of forks, and then you can pull the tine of the fork to the side to see the longer lengths. So it's not just equal length and width. The width is about 3 to 4 times the width. I hope that answers
Thank you.
it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Maggie. I have a question for Gilles. Can you talk a little bit about the milk that you were using to thicken the different muffin products, what level of thickness that was?
Yes, absolutely. So in this particular video, we used the starch thickener, and what I did is simply use the direction from the manufacturer in the back of the can, and I thickened it into a level 1, which would be a standard slurry. So just follow the direction of the particular thickener you are using in your facility.
Excellent, thank you. Maggie, as you know, and I'm sure you hear it all the time, bread is, of course, a major concern and challenge, I think, for facilities. Can you talk a little bit about, how you would categorize something like a grilled cheese, how you might, recommend dealing with things like sandwiches?
Sandwiches are a new challenge for us. And so think about grilled cheese. Even with the crusty end and everything, it's not necessarily going to work for your soft and bite size, right? And it's not going to work for your minced and moist by the mere fact that it's crispy. But let's say it wasn't crispy. Let's say we were able to mince it or even cut it up into bite-sized pieces for 5 and 6, meaning for minced and moist and soft and bite size. We're still going to have the issue of its squishability or the ability to mash it. So it's not going to fit into those categories. Okay, so then maybe we'll puree it. But think about cheese itself and think about bread, how sticky it is. I have not personally done it, but I've pureed enough sandwiches to know that even a cold sandwich that does not have cheese melted but has cheese in it, the bread itself is so sticky that it's not going to pass the spoon tilt test. So that might be something that we would sub out, a grilled cheese sandwich across the board, 4, 5, and 6. IDDSI has and I think we have a link to this at the end of our slides. IDDSI has a video on sandwiches where they recommend we take fresh bread and not breadcrumbs, but fresh bread, and puree them into fresh breadcrumbs. moisten them, perhaps even with a, you can even use a slurry like Gilles just described, and then put your pureed sandwiches, layer your puree sandwich meat or fixings on top, or your minced and moist, or even your soft and bite-sized sandwich fixings on there, and then put another layer of the bread. And you can do this in, they show it using a ring where you form everything around the ring, chill it, and then it should stand up on the plate by itself and remain very soft, very moist, and not sticky.
Thanks, Maggie. Yeah, and I would add to that in terms of the different kinds of breads that are out there in my playing around with them, that it really depends on the bread and how dry it is. Yeast breads are definitely the hardest ones to work with. Gilles focused on the muffins, and he showed a recipe for scones, and those actually are a much drier kind of a crumb, and you can, when you put them in a blender, they don't turn into a gumball like yeast bread does. So it really takes some experimentation for sure, and using the tests, and then even having your speech pathologist look at them, that's for sure. I think we have time for one last really quick question for you, Maggie. Can you talk a little bit about how you would use our compensatory strategies, things like straw in the Provail cups with level 4 liquids?
Well, level 4 is not pourable and is not sippable through a straw. That's the definition. So you would not be using those things. Level 4 is eaten with a spoon or a fork. That's new, so that's a shift for us.
Yeah, thanks. All right, I'm so sorry we are out of time, but I want to thank you all for your participation today and for the great questions. Just a couple of wrap-up reminders. As mentioned earlier, we do ask that you fill out the short survey that's coming up at the conclusion of the program, and you will be receiving an email within 1 week that's going to have links to the slides that were presented today, as well as your continuing education certificate. We invite you to follow the Bell Institute and General Mills Food Service on social media. You can explore these websites, which offer nutrition education resources, videos, recipe inspirations, as well as previously recorded continuing education webinars. And lastly, be sure to watch your inbox for future webinars and continuing education opportunities from us. This concludes today's program. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day. You may now disconnect.